So I put a tab out there on my community poll asking, what do you guys want to see next? You want to see Gladius videos, or do you want to go ahead and see color grading tutorials? Over 60 of you voted, and unanimously, we're going to be doing a color grading tutorial. Now this tutorial is going to cover Mavic 2 Zoom, Mavic 2 Pro, and the Autel EVO. So if you have any one of those 3 drones, everything I'm about to show you here is going to apply. It's going to be super simple, and I'll also have links down below for everything we're going to be talking about. Buckle up, grab some coffee. I've got Dunkin' coffee because this is the cheap stuff. Sit back and enjoy. Alrighty, what's good everybody? My name's Original Dobo, and I like to do drone and tech related content on my channel. So if this is your first time stumbling across it, definitely go ahead and smash that subscribe button, stay along for the ride. Today I've got a couple of clips throughout my journeys, and some of these clips you've probably seen, and I'm gonna show you how I render the results that I got with these. So first things first, let's go ahead and drag, let's go actually and size my window up here. Firstly, good Lord. I forgot I'm using a widescreen monitor, so sometimes not all of the monitor gets put into place here. So yeah, all right, so that looks good right there. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the clip. I'm gonna drag, whoa, all right, come on. That's where I want it. All right, let's go ahead and grab my clips from my editor, and I'm using Premiere Pro, but a lot of what I'm talking about can apply to Final Cut as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab that clip, this clip, and we'll put another clip in there from the Evo, and let's grab some more DJI clips. Perfect. All right, so let's start off with clip number 1, and let's go ahead and get to a point where we're happy with it. This was a clip that I shot out of the Mavic 2 Zoom, probably one of my favorite clips. This is of the Jupiter Lighthouse in West Palm Beach, and this clip was shot, I believe I shot this at 30 frames per second. That's when I was doing that. So because I'm shooting this whole video in 24 frames per second, first thing I want to do is go ahead and hit my speed and duration, slow it down to 80%, and that'll sort of equate to 24 frames essentially. I guess I also need to make sure my timeline is also set to 24 frames, otherwise it's gonna butcher all this. So there we go. So we got 24 frames set. I shot this in 4K. And yeah, so this is a pretty interesting scene because it's somewhat contrasty. I also shot in D-Cinlike, which D-Cinlike isn't quite as versatile as D-Log M, but let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So you'll notice I have a couple of scopes pulled up here. I've got my RGB Parade vector scope, which I typically use when I'm color grading like my talking headshots. Also have Lumiscopes open, which will show sort of my exposure. And this is incredibly underexposed, and this is just because I screwed up when I was starting this. I was also compensating for this shot right here. As you can see, as I came up, it's easier to pull back highlights and raise shadows than it is to deal with overexposure. So I was compensating for the shot I was doing. So because I knew I was gonna end here, I didn't wanna have this incredibly overexposed. You can see this little peak right here, that is the sun. So let's go ahead and firstly, let's go ahead and fix this underexposed problem that we have here. So first thing I would do is go ahead and pull my exposure up just a little bit to make the ground not quite as dark. And then I would probably pull my highlights down because I know that's gonna be a problem. And next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and add a bit of saturation. And with D-Cinlike, I'm typically using about 120 to 125. And that's really arbitrary, and you can adjust that as you like. There's really no right or wrong way to do that. And so far, that looks pretty good. It's bringing back some of the life to it, but it's still not 100% perfect. It's a little bit flat. So with that being said, I will probably pull down the shadows just a little bit more on this shot, just a little bit to get those blacks a little more inky, and bump the contrast up because this is somewhat contrasty, but I'm thinking probably right about there. And you can sort of already see we're bringing a lot of life back into this clip. Now with D-Cinlike, you want to be really careful because what I've noticed is this profile, at least on the Mavic 2 Zoom, can artifact and break apart really easy. So you don't want to push it too terribly far. I did notice that it's a little bit cool, so I want to go ahead and warm this up just a little bit because it's sort of at sunset and I want to get that vibe back in there. So a little warmer, about 15 to me looks like it's warm enough. And that's looking pretty good without like totally overdoing it. And then I can go ahead and also set some curves. I'm usually gonna put a curve here, and a curve here. So I set 3 points, and I'm just gonna simply pull down just a little bit. And this is really subtle, and just about there. While lowering down, I'll raise that up just about there. So to me, that looks pretty good. This is without using any sort of LUT. We'll come back to this clip in a little bit. We'll talk about how it's going to look with a LUT, but that'll get you to a point where, you know, it's workable and looks really good. Let's go on to the next clip. This next clip is going to be something straight out of the Mavic 2 Pro. Now the Mavic 2 Pro, first things first, I will typically always edit these with what we call an adjustment layer, just simply because there's a couple of things that I need to go ahead and apply to make this clip a little bit more accurate. First thing, you'll notice there's a bit of distortion because I'm using D-Log M. With D-Log M, you do get that barrel distortion because it's compressing all those colors in there. And first things first, let's go ahead and head to effects. I used the Henbu correction, and I basically listed it as Mavic 2, or it's actually Film Poet's Mavic 2 Pro correction, but Henbu has one too. So I'll leave some links down below where you can grab these. These are free, and you'll notice this will correct all that distortion, sort of brings it back in. Now, it may be a little bit extreme, and anytime I'm shooting in D-Log M, I'm also keeping in mind that there is going to be that distortion, so that way you could have an accurate depiction of like basically what you're dealing with here. Now let's take a look at the lumetri scopes. On this one, you can see it's perfectly balanced. This is a little bit better starting point. Without like, you know, wasting your time, let me talk about the saturation, because I think this is really important. What I found that works really well for me is to hit this with about 145 as a starting point. 145 can sort of start getting things back to where they need to be. Lower the shadows a little bit. There we go. And I try to get this down, and then I'm gonna bring the blacks down because the blacks are a little bit high. Ooh, just want them to where they're just touching. Now, little trick I like to use with D-Log M is I overexpose by at least the minimum of 1 stop. 1.3 to 1.7 is the absolute sweet spot with D-Log M. And let's go ahead and bump some contrast into here. Like 15 on the contrast works pretty solid. Highlights, I think the highlights are pretty good. I can drop the whites a little bit, and it'll give me a little bit more dynamic range, but so far looking pretty solid. I could bump the saturation up a little bit more if I really wanted to. 150 seems to be still pretty good for the scene. I like the color tone of it, but you can see over here in the background, there's like a little white building. I can sort of adjust the color tone based upon that white building. I think that's too warm, but I think like right there, just adding a little bit of warmth back in there works really well. And again, we're doing all of this without having to utilize any lookup tables or LUTs. Next thing I'm gonna do is add a little curve in here. This will give it a little bit more contrast. Not gonna go too heavy on the shadows. And I'm just gonna bump up this a little bit. And to me, that's pretty solid. Gives it a really nice feel. Looks like we've done at least something with it, and it brings it back in the Rec 709. You can see we've retained a lot of information in the highlights, and we still have shadow information, and we can move away from this clip because that looks good. Let's talk about the Autel EVO here a little bit. So the EVO is an interesting drone because I think out of all the log footage, this is the most unforgiving log format. I've had the most trouble trying to recover things after I've made mistakes shooting in log. Again, same rule applies. At least 1 stop over, I feel is right. I know, like, I've talked with Tim from Autel, and he said that he doesn't overexpose his log footage, but I tend to find in more contrasty situations that at least a stop over will help. And this is basically a stop over. So first thing we want to do is go ahead and add in some saturation to this. And again, I find about 140 works really well for the EVO log footage. That looks good. And let's pull these shadows and blacks way down. So we're going to pull the shadows down, and you can pull the blacks down too. Get them way, you can get these way down here actually, and that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to pull the highlights down a little bit, just a tad. And we'll pull the whites down just a little bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. Color and white balance, I think, is really spot on. And if I want to add a little bit of contrast in here, I can add like 20 to the contrast. And I'm pretty happy with this clip. That brought it back into Rec 709. No sort of, you know, no lookup table or anything like that. And you can see the dramatic difference here that we've had, and that's it. That was pretty straightforward on the EVO footage. Like I said, these saturation numbers that I'm using, you can pretty much take these to the bank. I've done extensive research with saturation, and I found that these are what look the most natural on all types of displays. That's the keyword there, all types of displays, because what you see on your display may not be what I see on mine. So 140 is a pretty good number. And again, you can also look at your RGB parade and sort of determine, you know, where the saturation levels reside. And you're right here in the middle, like all these colors are incredibly balanced very well. There's nothing like one higher than the other. So pretty happy with that. This looks good. Same thing here. This is a similar scene. And because it's a similar scene, we're going to come back and utilize this with a LUT. But let's go to this last clip here. This is another clip from the Mavic 2 Pro. And again, same situation. I'm going to go ahead and hit this with 140. And it didn't really look like it did a lot, but the highlights are pretty high and there's shadows are raised. So let's go ahead and lower the shadows. You can see we're getting some of that information back. And let's go ahead and hit the highlights a little bit, bring those down a little bit more. And with this one, I can actually lower the exposure just a little bit, just to get it underneath 100. Probably right there is pretty good. And you can see we've already got more information back into our scene. I'm going to increase the contrast. I'm going to hit it with like 20, but something I would play with. So maybe 25 is better there. Bring the highlights down a little bit more and maybe bring the whites down a little bit more. There we go. Blacks still aren't really where I want them to be, so I can bring these down. And it's just really just playing with it. And that looks pretty good. Let's see what we look like before, after. And that's it. That's literally all you need. 140 in saturation and then bring the shadows down. Just looking at your scopes will really help you be able to grade log footage. So really quickly, before I get into showing you some of the LUTs on some of this footage, why do we shoot in log? Well, log is going to give you the best dynamic range, and that's where you can retain the most information in your highlights and the most information in your shadows. That's the reason why I do it. And I was really afraid at first when I started shooting in log, and I've screwed up a lot of footage, but understanding it more and practicing more, like shooting clips in log footage like this and then bringing it back, is what is going to help you be able to grade a little bit more efficiently. And the more you do it, the better you'll be. And you'll see I'm just fixing the lens distortion here. But yeah, that looks pretty good. So let's take a look at some of these clips with some LUTs. And I'm going to show you the LUT kit that I like to use, how I place them on the footage. And yeah, so let's get going. So let's grab this one here. This is the Autel EVO. And I'm going to go ahead and go back into my lumetri panel. And I'm going to grab some more coffee right here. Bam. I was out on the water all day and I feel absolutely drunk. But let's go ahead and go to the creative tab, creative look. And I like using the creative look for LUTs specifically because I can tone back the intensity of them. And if you use the base, applying a LUT, you can't do that. So I have all my LUTs organized in a folder and I buy a lot of LUTs. But one of my favorite LUTs packages that I've been using lately is Triune. So Triune has these digital cinematic LUTs, but they sort of emulate like your favorite movies. And you can see you have Alexa footage, log footage, red, standard, and utility. I'm going to choose log. And for this one, what I've found that I like the most is, let's see, I think it was the drive LUT. Yeah. So the drive LUT to me is the one that I enjoyed the most. And I think I toned back the intensity to about 50%. Hit this with a little bit of saturation. So 140 on the saturation. And then I brought my shadows way down. And then I'm going to bring my blacks down. And let's see, that's looking pretty good. Contrast, I'm going to hit this with about 10 on the contrast. And a little bit more here, but I'm still not happy with the blacks. So I'm going to bring the blacks down way more. And you can really pull this. You can see that the EVO does really well as far as like this footage doesn't break apart, which further proves if you're shooting in H.265 that you're dealing with a 10-bit color science. All right, so let's go ahead and dial this back to like 40 actually. So 40, and that to me looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the colors on this. I think this color looks great. The sky looks amazing. Before, after, and it just really gives your footage like a unique color, a unique look. This looks awesome. I absolutely love this. Just looking at this here, it looks amazing. So that's for the Autel EVO. Now for this one here, I'm gonna reset this one. Bam. So let's reset this. Let's go into creative tab, and I have a couple of other LUTs that I like. Philly sort of has like a dreary look to it sometimes. So let's go, which one did I like the last time I was using this? I think I like, what was it? Game of Thrones. No, it wasn't Game of Thrones. Although that sort of fits. Oh, Batman vs Superman. That was the color I like. So, all right. So I've got this in here, and let's go dial this back to about 50%. So I sort of want that cool, like sort of dreary, I don't know, I guess your typical Philly look. I don't know. I'm going to drop these colors down here, and I love the way this LUT looks. It actually adjusted my exposure pretty well here, and it actually brought some back. Let's hit this with about 140 on the saturation, and I'm okay with the color being this cool. And for contrast, I'm gonna hit this with about 15-ish. Maybe I'll bump it up a little more because I want it to be a little more dramatic. Oop, not that much. Let's do 25. Looks pretty good. Colors are balanced. Nothing's clipping and nothing's crushed. And if you look at it, before, after, it just gives it, I hate it to even say this, but it gives this a very cinematic look. It looks pretty interesting, I guess the best way to put it. And totally didn't look anything like it did on this day. I remember this day, it was actually sunny and gorgeous, but that looks awesome. And if we just play this back, yeah, that looks amazing with the city in the backdrop, and the colors just make it look amazing. All right, so let's go to the first clip here, which we initially started with, which was this DJI Mavic 2 Zoom. Now this was shot in D-Cinlike. I'm gonna go ahead and reset this footage, and you can see I've just brought it back. I'm gonna come to the very last portion of the clip because this is the hero portion of the clip. The highlight standout feature is this look right here. Let's go ahead and import a LUT. Now I'm gonna change what LUT I'm using. So I don't wanna use this LUT. I wanna go all the way back to my Triune main because I don't wanna use anything for log. I wanna use a standard LUT for this. So standard LUT, and given the time of day that we were using, I'm going to use my, where was it? Let's go to Skyfall. There we go. I like this color, and I want to go 115 for the saturation. And you can see it's balanced out, like just adding that LUT to this has already balanced out some of the colors. And right here, I do need to raise my shadows or my blacks. In this instance, I'm just gonna raise my black to give it a little bit more of a cinematic look. I'm gonna bring the shadows down a hair, and let's go ahead and just bump the contrast up, and we'll give the contrast like 20. There we go. Let's bump the shadows up in this instance here. Shadows up, and I'm gonna take the highlights down. All right, so let's play this one through. And it probably is because, you know, good old Premiere dropping frames, but it sort of gives you an idea of how this looks. It just looks somewhat rustic, and overall like gives you that very cinema style because it's a little bit faded out there. But that's it. That's literally how I color grade my footage. I am constantly watching my lumetri scopes, making adjustments, and keep in mind, like there is no right or wrong way to do this. And what you like, I may not like, and what I like may be different from you. So don't let anybody tell you you're doing it wrong, but watch your scopes and just make sure that your footage is not artifacting or banding. That is a common problem with anything that is not 10-bit. You have to be careful with that footage. And of course, the Mavic 2 Zoom is one of those drones where I'm always careful with, but I'll include some samples at the end of this after I shut my trap. But I want to thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you smash that like button because it does let me know you want to see more tutorials like this. And if you really enjoy the content, be sure to hit subscribe button if you're still lingering around. I know there's a couple of you guys. You've been around here a couple of videos now. Hit the subscribe button. It's free. Stay original, guys. I'll see you next time.